Welcome to One is Enough, NKR's newest podcast.
Newest, new, completely original, never been done before. God, we hope this doesn't turn into a dumpster fire podcast. Yes, absolutely.
I am so excited. When we were thinking about what our first episode would be, I figured the best way to start would be the origins of the NKR. And what better way than to talk about what's happened to you and how that plays into the start of the NKR.
So, this is not a therapy session, but I do want to take you back to when you were about 10 years old.
It's feeling a little like a therapy session, Mike.
Well, it may...
We doing some regression therapy? Are we going to do some hypnosis later? What?
It may veer off into that, but for now, we're going to focus on 10-year-old Samantha. What was going on at that point in your life, and what
Should I make my voice higher pitched to make it sound real?
No.
Okay, good.
And what happened?
What happened was I lost my kidneys.
At 10.
Pretty simple on that one. Yes. So I was born in 1996 and everything was fine. But I had a genetic condition that we didn't know about. Surprisingly, nobody in the family had it, despite everybody having at least 2 kids and my grandparents having the good Irish Catholics that they are, having the 5 kids. And none of us had this issue except me.
Right.
I feel so special, I guess, called nephronopathesis, which means that between the ages of 10 and 14, your kidneys just say, all right, see ya, and stop working. And so before this happened, we had no idea what kidneys really were, or that there were 2 of them, that you could be living donor. And when it did happen, we had to learn a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. And things were a lot different back then than they are now.
Oh, God, it was the Stone Age back then. I mean, when we were trying to find a donor, now it's so much easier with Facebook and all of that stuff. Back then, Facebook wasn't even invented yet.
So you were lucky because your dad was a match for you, right? So
theoretically.
Yeah, so crisis over. Your dad's going to donate his kidney to his, at that time, 11-year-old at that point?
Yes.
11-year-old daughter.
When my kidneys failed, I spent 3 weeks in the hospital because they couldn't find an outpatient dialysis location for me because it had to be specialized because I was a child.
Right.
They had to have a smaller machine. So I ended up having just to stay at the hospital because there was no dialysis alternative at the time for 3 weeks. And then when I got out on outpatient, I had turned 11 in the hospital.
Wow.
That was so much fun. I got to tell you, everybody feels sorry for me for that one. The social workers, they feel so bad for you. They brought cupcakes. I swear to God, the cupcake was like this little piece of nothing. The icing was probably 6 inches high. I was 11. What better way to celebrate your birthday?
And what hospital was this?
This was Stony Brook,
Okay.
actually out on Long Island.
So that's where your doctors were first in Stony Brook?
Yeah, at first, again, we didn't know anything. We didn't really know about transplant. We didn't know much about kidneys to begin with. So Stony Brook was kind of just where we ended up.
Sure. So now your dad did all his testing at Stony Brook at that time, or
No. After I got out of the hospital and we got me out on an outpatient dialysis system, we ended up going to Cornell because they were the best.
NewYork-Presbyterian, Weill Cornell in Manhattan?
Yes. Usually known to its patients as simply Cornell.
Yeah, but there's millions of people listening to this podcast, so that's why I just want to put that out there.
Right.
Millions.
We hope. It's one guy in his basement.
All right, it's not that kind of show. So you transferred over to Weill Cornell.
Yes.
Your dad went through all the testing to be a donor for you at Weill Cornell.
Correct.
Great news. He's a match,
Mm-hmm.
right? Fantastic. So what?
It wasn't
what's the
actually
problem?
that simple for multiple reasons, but we actually had a couple donors go through at once. My mother and my sister, who was significantly older than I was, so she was allowed to go through the process. But my mother was blood type incompatible. My father, everything seemed fine. Surgery was scheduled. Everything was ready to go. It was a good match. 36 hours before the transplant, we get a call. Yeah, you're going to reject his kidney. We can't do the surgery.
36 hours.
36 hours before the transplant.
So as I have 3 children, as you know, and first I can't even imagine.
And thank God they all look like your wife.
Yeah, they are lucky for that. I can't even imagine having a child with an illness such as yours, and then going to the point, having the ability to, now I know I can help them, and that being taken away 36 hours before a surgery date.
Well, literally, when I was first admitted with what we later found out was kidney failure, it was 2 a.m. and they were telling my parents, "Yeah, we're very sorry." So we went from that to, "Okay, everything's gonna be fine. You're gonna get his kidney," to, "Nope, strike that from the record. It's not gonna work." Now, the reason was because I had 2 blood transfusions during that 3-week stay.
Right.
And because I had developed antibodies due to those transfusions, I would have rejected my father's kidney.
That sounds like a future episode. We talk about antibodies and desensitization and stuff like that.
And eplets, I'm sure, and all of the lovely science.
That's way down the road. So now your dad's out, and what happens?
We start searching again. So we go to that giant family again. Thank God I had a huge family, and everybody, in my family's generation had multiple kids, and everybody was a good Irish Catholic. So we went to the aunts and the uncles, and several were matches, but my uncle had stepped forward, and then he stepped back and said, "I don't want to go through surgery. I'm too nervous." My aunt, who later became my voucher donor, stepped forward, but it was only a 1 out of 6 match, so it wasn't really, the best option for a pediatric patient at the time. So we kept going and going and going through friends and family, finding nothing, hitting a lot of walls, because the same reason I would reject my father, the reason I would reject my cousins and my uncles, et cetera, until my cousin Tristan, who is my father's eldest brother Donald's son. And we found out through this whole process that my father and his oldest brother are actually perfect matches to each other.
Oh, wow.
So it was a phenomenal match, because basically my cousin's father and my father are basically the same genetically.
Wow.
So it was a fantastic match, and we proceeded with the transplant in July 12th of 2007.
Wow. So that still doesn't help me answer the question, why and how was the NKR born? But what I know, and then you can fill in the gaps, is that your dad is and was at the time a very successful businessman, and he's a problem solver. And I know he doesn't like when a problem can't be solved, and he's really good at solving them. So I think from what I was always told is that he could not wrap his mind around that he was eligible to help his daughter, and then was told 36 hours before that he couldn't. And that kind of drove him crazy.
Yeah, now that you've worked for him, you probably know, that would never work for him. He wouldn't be able to sleep.
Right.
But basically, it was going through this process and saying, my God, there isn't a national registry? How? My father was totally and completely willing to donate his kidney, obviously.
Right.
And completely healthy enough to. He was cleared for donation. But there was no national program so he could put a kidney in and get a kidney out, as it were.
Right.
And he couldn't live with that. It didn't compute, as it were. So he went, okay, well, why don't I do it? And thus the NKR was born.
Now, let me just ask this question. Your dad is not a surgeon? Is your dad a surgeon?
No.
Is he a doctor?
No.
Did he go to medical school?
Nope.
Nurse practitioner?
No. He went to Wharton.
A scribe, a medical scribe? No, right?
No medical training or affiliation whatsoever. Which was a big problem in the beginning for many transplant centers to understand.
I'm sure it was. But what he was able to do was to bring business sense to an area that had not had that happen before on a national level.
Correct.
Yeah. Wow. It's mind-blowing.
I think I actually made Mike speechless. This is incredible.
Now I'll come up with other stuff. But I read a 2012, and we're gonna have a guest come up soon, and we're gonna dive more into this. But I read a 2012 New York Times article that was done about your parents and the start of the National Kidney Registry. And
Oh, the Disney hero handsome story? Yes.
yes, that's right. With that, the chin, and he looked like one of the what's his name from like the Beauty and the Beast, the guy.
Eric.
Is it Beauty and the Beast?
Yeah, Eric's Beauty and the Beast.
Is
They
it?
actually gave a name to one, and it was him.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that could be it.
That was the only one that had a name, I think.
I got to brush up on my my
well,
Disney.
you have 3 kids. You should be very familiar with Disney.
Yeah, they're phased out of Disney now.
Oh.
14-year-old twins and a 10-year-old. But anyway, so they started. I know your mom was heavily involved. They started this nonprofit, right, called the National Kidney Registry. They invested, according to the article, $300,000 of their own money. So not only were they personally invested because of their daughter, but they also, put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and invested their own money. And I love a quote that was in there. It said, "The goal was very simple." This is out of a New York Times article. "Get everybody transplanted in under 6 months if you had a living donor," he said. One of the things that drove us was the enormity of the problem. The other thing that drove us was that we understood the pain of being in that situation. I love that quote, and I don't think anyone was better suited to start this organization because of his, love for his daughter and the want to help his daughter. And then, when I had these conversations with him, he sort of now transferred that love to all these other people who were in need because, in his mind, he's solved the problem and he just wants, everyone else to be able to benefit, like you have. So before we move on to our next guest, because you're technically the first guest.
I'm the co-host. You know this.
Well, you will be the co-host after episode 1, but today you were the very, very first guest on the One Is Enough podcast.
I do not accept that. I am not the guinea pig on this one.
All right. Well, guest 1A will be coming up shortly. But is there anything else as far as I don't know, just like how you were feeling back then? What as a
this
kid?
is back to the therapy session.
Yeah,
huh?
I mean, what as a kid, did you understand at 10, 11 years old that like you needed this kidney, like what the kidney did and how important it was?
I don't believe that I understood what it did. I just knew that without it, I was so anemic that blood would just appear in my gums in the morning when I woke up. That my eye would just start twitching randomly. That I couldn't grow. I was 5'2", and I couldn't keep weight on either, so I was 64 pounds. Yeah, I knew I wasn't healthy.
Right.
And then the giant port in my neck was kind of a clue that something was wrong.
And then how, probably a silly question, but how did your life change, after you got the kidney transplant?
I was able to shower again because the dialysis thing wasn't in my neck.
So things that, we'll say normal people or people who aren't
I grew.
sick.
It's a little different when you're a pediatric because things that, you don't have to deal with as an adult in kidney failure are present. So
right.
Again, I wasn't growing. I wasn't putting on weight, which is part of kidney failure, but the not growing thing, that kind of stops after you're about 16,
Right.
So when somebody's in kidney failure in their 40s, that's not really a problem. But, I couldn't hold down certain foods. I couldn't run. I couldn't, I couldn't swim very far. I was an avid swimmer as a kid. Things like that. I couldn't ride my bike for more than a block and a half without getting winded. I couldn't go to school because of all the dialysis treatments. Again, different things as a kid that you hit when you're a kid versus when you're an adult in kidney failure.
Right.
Things definitely got better afterward. I'll say that.
I would think so.
I had a working organ again.
We all need
Kind of
working
an
organs.
important one.
All right. Well, I think that is a great recap on how the NKR, the National Kidney Registry, got started. And I'm excited to talk to our sort of first guest, although I'm going to consider
Actual first guest.
I'm going to consider you the first guest, Maria, who's coming up, because I think she had, according to you, had a little something to do with the National Kidney Registry before it was the National Kidney Registry.
Something to do with it.
So I can't wait to talk to Maria. For the second half of today's episode, we are very fortunate to be joined by a member of the transplant community who was introduced to the Hill family when the National Kidney Registry was still an idea based upon being involved in a very imperfect process in desperate need of being fixed. Maria Abreu Goris, did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay, is a physician assistant at NewYork-Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center with 25 years of experience in the field of renal pancreas transplantation. She has held several different roles in the transplant program, including waitlist transplant coordinator, living donor and recipient coordinator, clinical manager of operations for the renal pancreas transplant program. She currently serves as the chief transplant coordinator for the living donor program. Wow, I have to beef up my title. Thank you, Maria, for joining us today. Do you have any reservations about being I'm supposed to say, because the script says our first guest, but I got to interview my co-host now, which was really our first guest, Samantha Hill. But we're super excited about having you because, from what I understand from Samantha, you played an integral role of the National Kidney Registry starting, right, Samantha?
Absolutely. Without her, the NKR probably would not have necessarily gone off the way it did.
So yeah, I'm still confused by the whole thing. So I don't know which one of you wants to start first, but how did that happen?
Sure, I'll take this one. So basically what happened was I had already had my transplant, my surgery. Everything was fine. I had my cousin donated. The kidney was a great match. Everything went the way it was supposed to at Cornell. And I had come back for my follow-up with Dr. Sandy Kapoor, who was my surgeon. And, everything went fine at the follow-up. I was healing properly. Everything was where it was supposed to be. Kidney hadn't moved. And stitches were still, holding things together. Everything was fine. And so we said, well, the only way to kick this program off would be with transplant center buy-in. So, somebody in the industry saying they're not crazy, and also teaching us, more about the industry itself and not just about kidney transplant. So we said, well, we just went to Dr. Kapoor. Maybe he'll see us. Maybe he'll help us with this. And so, we went to Maria for a follow-up appointment. And this was after my follow-up. I didn't actually need a second follow-up.
Right.
But we figured, well, we'll schedule it as her follow-up, and then we'll just, quickly switch places with her and Dad.
Wait. So you saying that this whole thing was a big ruse?
Yes. Almost.
What?
Almost.
In New York terms, if anyone's listening to this from New York, so this whole thing was a fugazi, is what you're saying?
Pretty much, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of. Oh, almost. Almost. We didn't actually
They came
do this.
clean. They came clean.
Yeah, we came clean. So what happened was we were making the appointment with Maria and saying, oh yeah, we just want to follow up with Dr. Kapoor for the surgery, whatever.
Right.
The big fat lie. And she said, oh yeah, sure, he's in clinic on this day. Does this time work for you? She was totally honest. She had no idea. And then my mother, who was with me at the time, my father wasn't there. He was not a part of this lie. He let his wife do the dirty work. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, she said, okay, I have to come clean. After we had made the appointment, she said, okay, I have to come clean. It's not what we want the appointment with Dr. Kapoor for. We just want to talk to him about this idea we have. Obviously, the idea was for the National Kidney Registry. And so Maria, thankfully, didn't laugh us out of her office and said, oh, well, in that case, you don't want a clinic visit. You want him in his office. Yeah, I can help you make that appointment. It's like, oh, thank God, the first hurdle cleared. We actually have, potential to talk to somebody in the transplant industry. So that was, sort of it. She was pretty much the gatekeeper for the NKR.
So at the time, I was the PA, and I worked with Dr. Kapoor, so I saw patients with him in clinic. And we had just seen Samantha for her, like she said, her first follow-up appointment after transplant. And then they gave me the big lie, which turned out to be a great thing, and certainly helped facilitate that first appointment out of the clinical practice and into the, his private office. But I think, kudos to Garrett and your mom and Dr. Kapoor for actually having, the foresight, right, to understand that this was a problem and it needed to be solved. And it wasn't just a problem for Samantha. We encountered this problem for many of our other patients.
So what about Garrett and Jan and Samantha? Like, how'd you not know that they weren't these just like crazy parents and like that come up with some crazy idea? Like,
Yeah, what made you say yes to
yeah,
my mother
yeah,
and
what
I
made
when
you
we were
say yes?
asking for this appointment?
What made me say yes? Their parents. And they love their kid and they want to help their kid, so. And I also have a personal transplant story, which is not part of this, but I'm just saying it's just you see that their desire to help their child, and in the process, they were going to help many other people, which obviously they have 7,800 transplants later, NKR facilitated transplants later. But I think pivotal was that meeting with Dr. Kapoor, and obviously Dr. Kapoor opening the doors and also, embracing a new idea, right, an innovative idea.
So what was transplant like at that time when Samantha got her transplant?
Yeah, so transplant at that time, if you were not compatible, the only thing we offered the recipients was you need to find another donor. So we really couldn't work with that donor because we weren't able to do that unless we could potentially consider an ABO incompatible transplant, but that was, more additional immunosuppression and many things. So it was really, it was a roadblock for patients. If they didn't have a compatible donor, it was definitely a roadblock. Or if they were compatible, but they had, as Samantha had, antibodies, and we did a cross match, which is what happened with Samantha's story, we do what's called a final cross match, where we test the blood just a few days before the transplant to make sure that nothing's changed.
Sure.
So if you had patients who had antibodies, and they had a positive cross match with their donor, they had no other options. So it was really pivotal to start this program.
So did you guys do pairs at that time? Like,
At that time, we did not.
wow,
It was just direct then.
that's like
At
something I
that-
take for granted because I'm like,
But
we're
neither.
gonna have another episode about vouchers and all that stuff. But the pairs and vouchers and
No, that was
remote
not-
donation.
That was not even. That was not even part of the conversation at that time.
Wow.
It's not that long ago. 15 years ago. I mean,
No.
that's just really not that long ago.
Holy mackerel!
So.
Well, it's interesting. We're completely off script right now, but there was a question.
What, there's a script I'm supposed to follow?
just general guidelines.
Oh.
It's like the Pirates Code and Pirates of the Caribbean. It's just guidelines.
They're not gonna know, but Lori's going to kill me.
She is. She worked very hard on that.
I know.
But there's a question in the script of what your father did find you a donor, did that transfer over or something to that effect, and not even close. I mean, now yes, because of microsites, but
Right.
back then it was just like, okay, let's just figure out paired exchange. Let's just figure out how to do a chain. I mean, our first transplant, NKR facilitated transplant was at Cornell,
Right.
but it was only at Cornell. It
Right.
wasn't even multi-center at
It
the
was
time.
with a non-directed donor. At that time, they weren't called non-directed donors; they were altruistic donors.
Correct.
Yeah. We, there's a whole big thing about that, about staying. I know Garrett likes. We like Good Samaritan versus altruistic because I think anyone who donates their kidney, whether it's directly to a loved one, there's altruism there, right? I mean,
Right.
They're altruistic.
Right.
So non-directed, obviously,
It's a little different.
A good Samaritan.
Right.
But I think all donors, kidney, liver, are altruistic to some extent.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think at the time that whatever, whether they were referred to as altruistic or Good Samaritan. I don't remember exactly, but it was a lady from California who came to New York because we wouldn't do remote donations there
that
either.
wasn't a thing yet.
So there's a lot of innovation, a lot of things that today we take for granted. Even like, the staff that comes on board now probably don't even understand how far this has come because of NKR in that first meeting with Cornell.
Well, that first chain was scheduling it was done over the phone. My father was calling you guys to make the appointments for the surgeries.
It was Valentine's Day.
It was Valentine's Day, 2008. Why on God's green earth did they choose that day?
I think it just happened. I don't know. It was purposeful.
My wife's birthday's on Valentine's Day.
There you go.
I always...
maybe there's meaning to that.
I always like to celebrate it as Singles Awareness Day. But anyway, so when we offered you those matches, I mean, we gave them to you on Excel spreadsheets, and we gave you 400 different possibilities that you had to sift through. I mean, we don't do any of that anymore. It was all in Excel files.
Yeah, those early days, definitely. And it was my colleagues, my transplant coordinator colleagues, who at that time I was not really involved with that portion of it. At that time, I was the PA with Dr. Kapoor in the surgical forum, or surgical theater, I should say. So at that time, it was my colleagues, and they did sift through that.
And
there was were a lot of meetings. I remember on M2, your dad would come with his programmer to try and understand HLA and all of these, medical and immunological terms that he needed to understand in order to be able to come up with this algorithm.
Yeah.
Which he obviously has very successfully done with his with his team.
So this might be a loaded question, and you have probably sort of answered it, but Lori wrote it down, so I'm supposed to ask it. You've been doing this for 25 years.
I started when I was like 2.
2, yeah, I could see that.
She's about 27 now. Yeah, that makes sense.
What do you see as the greatest innovation in transplant over the last 25 years? What's catapulted? What's helped, I should say, catapult transplant to where it is today?
I think the immunogenetics lab. I think in terms of definitely the immunogenetics lab and the testing and the precision that we have in testing today, including I know you're going to talk about it in future segments, but obviously flow cytometry, which is not new, but definitely the way it's approached is a little different today. Eplet testing is something that was not done until very recently.
Right.
Eplet matching. But definitely I think the immunogenetics has allowed for NKR and the transplant centers that participate with NKR to really have a strong showing and be able to facilitate so many transplants. Because without that, we wouldn't be able to screen the patients properly, right? And also, even the testing now that we do, that a lot of testing is like the cheek swabs and things like that. It's just making it easier for the donors also to have testing, right? So facilitating it for the donors.
I thought about this a few times, and sometimes when you go to church, the priest will tell you that something tragic has to happen, right, in order for something good to happen. And I'm sure Samantha would wish and pray that her situation didn't happen, to her, when she was 10 or 11. But often, I just think about if that didn't happen, if she didn't have that need, for a transplant, Garrett would still be a businessman doing something else and still be very successful. And we wouldn't have the National Kidney Registry, and there wouldn't be 7,600 or 800, facilitated transplants over the last 15 years. And every time I think about it, I'm just like, wow, I don't know. I mean, my co-host is right here. How do you respond to that? I know, like I said, it's no one wants to go through that.
If my kidneys had never failed, that's the question.
Yeah, we wouldn't be sitting here today. We would not, I don't think. Because why would your dad or mom create the National Kidney Registry? There'd be no need for that. He was doing
Oh.
something else.
I'd be in military school, I guarantee it.
You should probably go back to military school.
I never went, unfortunately. They
should've
wouldn't
taken-
take me.
They should have sent you.
They wouldn't take me with the kidney problem. But
No, it's definitely their drive. Both Garrett, Jan, and also it's actually very remarkable that somebody from in the business world was able to accomplish something that the medical world needed that push. Right?
Sure.
It's actually probably get a lot of people upset when they hear that, but it's true.
it got a lot of people upset back then that he was not in the medical
Right.
field. I mean, people would, there were certain centers at first who didn't want to work with us simply because it
Yeah.
was like, who is this upstart? From this Wall Street upstart? Not that my father had ever been on Wall Street, but they assumed.
He drove through it once or twice, right?
Exactly. He
Walked
drove
down.
through it
Yeah.
downtown. But, who is this Wall Street upstart who's telling us with no medical degree how to help patients? And it's like, well, the guy who kind of knows what he's doing. Because he's not a medical professional, he's not, completely focused on the science.
Well,
But I
he's
would
a
like to say
visionary,
he was a
right?
visionary,
He's a
but he
visionary.
has the utmost respect for medical professionals, surgeons.
Does
and
he?
Yes, I think so.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think so too.
I don't know what you hear around the dinner table. but-
Yeah, no, I really, and I do mean that. I will always be honest and transparent on this podcast, but I really,
I'll be honest too, but
I-
that doesn't mean
no,
I'm going to say everything I mean.
I think that he does, but they're medical professionals, not business people, and that needed a business person to come in and
Absolutely.
organize and mechanize and
Well, that's-
automate.
operationalize the
Yeah.
process.
Well, that's the thing. He wasn't, medical professionals are often, and no offense to medical professionals, it's just kind of their thing. They're usually bogged down in the science of it and focused on that and the theoretics and the, outcomes data and whatnot and that sort of thing. Whereas, a logistical due date is not really part of medical training. So that's where it comes in that you did, in fact, need somebody from the business world whose day-to-day operations are due dates, bottom lines, logistics, and that sort of thing to kind of, just tweak the system enough so that it moves forward.
Right. And he certainly tweaked.
I think he's tweaked a lot more than a little bit, but
Hopefully, he doesn't listen to this. So.
don't worry, he doesn't know
Because
how
that's
to
going to
listen to a
generate
podcast.
an email, and you know where that goes.
He doesn't know what a podcast is. We're fine.
Oh, thank goodness. So obviously we're in our infancy stages here with the podcast. One is enough. And, recording our very first episode here with Maria. But assuming that someone out there is listening to this podcast at some point, we hope, what would your message about living kidney donation be to that person, Maria?
I think that for a living donor, you're not only changing the life of the recipient, who would definitely, obviously medically need help, and
much so.
psychosocially also. You
Not
make such
one
a huge
comment, Mike.
but you're also you're impacting the lives of their family members, of their children, of everyone around them. And I think I'm not a living donor, but I think from a living donor perspective, I also think it gives you a sense of truly helping. I mean, there are very few areas, unless you become a doctor or something like that, or in the medical field, that you feel like you're really impacting people's lives. And I think that that's one way.
I've said that to people, I don't know if the intro said I'm a living donor, but I donated, back in 2018 as a Good Samaritan donor. And how often in your life while you're alive,
Right.
you could feel this sense of that you're able to help someone. And I was fortunate enough to meet my recipient, and maybe that could be an episode in the future. But I'm an organ donor on my license, so I got the little heart, and God forbid when that day happens, my organs will go to whoever can use them and need them. But I'm going to be dead, right? So I'm not gonna feel the joy or just the feeling of knowing that I was able to help someone. And it's different than, giving, $100 to your favorite charity or, $50 to your charity. It's hard to explain, but yeah, that you hit the nail on the head for sure.
Yeah, I think it's very fulfilling for the donors. It's interesting how
We're fine, Mike. We're fine.
Oh, Mike,
We're going to
stop.
cut stuff.
Don't stop. Keep going.
I don't know. You're showing the timer. It's a good thing they could edit.
Exactly. They're going to cut stuff. It's fine. That's what we have him for.
Is this live?
From New York.
Go ahead. No,
I forgot what I was saying.
No,
Your message to donors and patients.
I already did that.
Yeah, did
All
that.
right. Message to patients
To recipients?
or patients, both.
Okay.
I find there to be a difference.
Yeah, we have a really big.
So,
yeah.
You find a difference between...
Well, a recipient is someone that received
one.
a
A
kidney.
patient is
and
waiting to.
That's what we always say.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so for a patient on the waiting list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In order to participate in this, you need to put forth a donor. I mean, there's nothing that can facilitate a transplant unless you have a potential donor, with the exception of end of chains,
Sure.
which is another wonderful thing that has come out of NKR as a result of NKR, right? That there are very few times, but there are times where we're able to give a living donor kidney to a waitlist patient, which is wonderful because they otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity.
So someone that's listening to this, since you just said some terminology that they may not
I'm sorry.
understand, an end of chain is what? Like, what does that mean?
So an end of chain is when you've started with a non-directed donor at some point, and now you've maybe transplanted X number of people, 5,
Right.
10, 15, 20, whatever it is, and you get to a donor who's not paired with any recipient. So for whatever reason, there's sometimes the donors have a timeline that they need to keep. They want to donate within 3 weeks, or their daughter's getting married and they want to do it before the wedding or after the wedding, whatever the scenario is for that particular donor. And we run a list. Running the list means that we get the UNOS list, and we run a list and we actually pair that end of chain because there's no one, the
Sure.
chain has stopped.
It stops at that.
It stops
person
at
on the
that
list.
donor,
Yeah.
and then we pair that patient up with somebody from the waitlist team. So people who've been waiting for a number of years.
And those people on the wait list, probably really veered off topic here, but those
Yeah.
people on the wait list, I think it's important for people to understand they're just sitting there waiting.
They're
That's why it's
waiting.
called the wait
That's
list.
why it's called the waitlist.
They
Correct.
don't have a living donor
They do not have a living donor. They're sitting on the waitlist
for a deceased donor
for a
organ.
deceased donor organ, and their waiting time can be, in the order of anywhere from 2 to 10 years, depending on their blood type and their circumstances.
Yeah, and
and
New
the
York is
region.
the wait time I know in New York is very high.
Right. But I think getting back a little bit to the NKR and some of the, I think, areas that we didn't think about were also the remote donations, the...
Oh, don't worry. We have episodes
Yeah,
on
we
all
got
of
it.
this
Yeah.
stuff planned. But,
We're hoping
that's,
to do like 100 episodes.
but that's why we're doing this. And it's to Mike's point of us veering off topic and going every which way and so many different
It's easy to
things.
do in transplant.
There's so much to talk about in transplant. There's so much to learn. There's so much to absorb. I mean, that uphill battle of my father learning from, going from I didn't even know I could donate as a living person to, and then I had 2 kidneys to running this organization. That uphill battle. I mean, obviously not everybody needs to know that much, but just from time of your kidneys have failed to time of transplanted and so on, the learning curve is so steep, and the terminology is so specific. That's what we're trying to do with this podcast, is to help people understand transplant.
Right.
And I think we didn't say the word that Lori wrote down, but it's important. We're trying to normalize transplant,
Living
living
donation.
donation. Yeah, it's obviously it's not for everyone. Samantha even had someone in her own family that made the choice that they couldn't do it or didn't want to do it, and that's okay.
That's
I mean,
fine.
That's totally fine.
Yeah.
I know it's
Normal.
difficult for probably the family members to understand. Like, wait a minute, why this person's
Why
my
do you wanna
family?
give it to me? Yeah.
But it's surgery, right? But I think what we hope to do is, with future episodes and to normalize it. If it's right for you to go down that path, then this is something that you could do.
Yeah, and often we would say to if donors ruled out for different reasons, you could champion, right? You could champion and your recipient and go out there and try and speak about the need for a living donor, because maybe you ruled out for, you don't have to disclose that, but you can be that voice
Right.
for them, right? And I guess probably another topic will be microsites, right? That's another way to do it.
There are like 7 topics surrounding microsites too. So trust us, we have a lot of exciting episodes upcoming. Just again because we have so much in this one little
thing.
kidney, one organ.
One organ.
One is enough.
That's Sebastian was in a Sebastian was in a corner.
Say it.
I was waiting for someone to say it. Why did I have to say it?
You didn't. I did.
One is enough.
It's perfect.
It is great.
One host is enough.
You know,
too,
and when we came up with the name, I did not come up with the name, but when they came up with the name, I loved it because
corporate came up with the
corporate, yeah, because it's not. This is like not only going to be like a donor centered, right, podcast per se, and the name shouldn't just be donor centered, but one is enough, right? I'm a person who has one kidney. That's all I got, right? One was enough for Samantha for patients. Although
I mean, technically I have 3, but 2 of them don't count.
That we don't want to go down that path. But I know someone that's got like 5. You know, like,
but only one is working.
but only one is enough.
We want to thank Maria for joining us today and thank New York-Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center for their support of Maria's appearance with us. And we are grateful for her unique perspective and hope that her participation in this podcast sparks future conversations about living kidney donation.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you for having me.